Great, thank you. Welcome. This is the last panel of the day on U.S.-Turkey foreign relations. My name is Denise Natali, and again, I'd like to welcome you and introduce our four distinguished panelists. His Excellency Ambassador Gokhan Cetinsaya, Ambassador James Jeffrey, Dr. Kilic Kanat, and Dr. Stephen Larrabee. Their bios are in the booklet, so please feel free to look at them. We're going to follow the same format as the previous panels. Each of our panelists will speak for 10 minutes. I will make some following comments and then open open it up to the floor. As we start, I'd like to introduce some issues and questions that I would like the panelists to address in their presentations. As we talk about U.S.-Turkish foreign policy or U.S.-Turkey relations, we start off with the evident that Turkey is an integral and essential ally to the United States, that Turkey and the United States, this relationship goes back not only to our NATO alliance, but to shared values. Turkey is one of the budding or democracies in the region. We have shared defense interests and, of course, shared commitment to state sovereignty. This relationship also has gone through difficult times, ebbs and flows. There have been swings, but nonetheless, we have been grounded over the last several decades. Turkey remains an anchor of regional stability, and this relationship that we share with Turkey, or this role, has not changed. In fact, I would say that over the last several years, as the United States has withdrawn from Iraq, and as we can say a policy of leading from behind, Turkey's role as a regional leader and an economic partner has become all the more important. With that said, in my view, this relationship is also facing some of its deepest challenges. These challenges have emerged over the last several years, so that you start to hear some of these questions, at least when I returned back to the United States after about 2 decades away. Is Turkey a good NATO ally? Is Turkey being a strong coalition partner against ISIS? Are there cracks in this relationship? How deep are they? And what does this mean for the future? What are some of the challenges, again, that I hope that our panelists will address in their discussions? We've already talked before about some of these dramatic changes in the Middle East, whether that be the breakdown of 2 very important states in Turkey's southern border, Iraq and Syria, challenges to state sovereignty that also challenge the territorial integrity of Turkey, at least its southern flank. Iraq, again, the leading from behind policy. We've talked about Syria, these emerging or consolidating sectarian trends in the region. Is Turkey exacerbating these trends, working with these trends, mediating these trends? What role is Turkey playing, and how is that affecting U.S. interests? There's been an issue that hasn't been addressed, and this is where I see one of, again, a deep challenge, is our anti-ISIS campaign. How different threat perceptions between the United States and Turkey are affecting not only the ability to bring Turkey on board as a coalition partner fully, which Turkey is, but nonetheless, is there a misunderstanding from whether the United States part or Western Europe of Turkey's perceptions? And by this, I'm going to target, again, arming different groups, non-state actors, and that would be the PYD, and some of Turkey's very important Kurdish issues. So on the one hand, while we are looking for local partners on the ground, arming the Kurds, are we unintentionally, is the coalition policy unintentionally exacerbating some of Turkey's threat perceptions? How is this affecting our relationship as well? So nonetheless, as we pursue this anti-ISIS campaign, how can we reassess U.S.-Turkey relations? Moving forward then, how do we address both Turkey and the United States, not only these threats, but what are the concerns, what are the challenges, what scenarios do we envision? I hesitate to say over the next decade because we can get past the next 2 years, but what scenarios can we envision in these ties over the next 5 years? And what opportunities and challenges remain ahead in ensuring this important strategic relationship between Turkey and the United States. I'm going to now leave some of these general questions to our panelists, and I'd like to start with Ambassador Cetinsaya.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you mentioned also, Turkey and United States are indispensable and essential allies, and their relations has a strong strategic dimension, and this time-tested alliance, strategic alliance. In the Cold War, there were different dimensions, of course, but in the post-Cold War period, there appeared new dimensions. I would like to refer to, as a reference point or reference text, the Turkish-American Strategic Partnership document dated July 2006. It was prepared at that time according to the new dimensions of the Cold War and the conditions of the Middle East and Eurasia. And in that document, Turkey and the United States declares that they share the same set of values in 2006, ideals in our regional global objectives, the promotion of peace, democracy, freedom, and prosperity. And in that document, they pledged themselves to work together on all issues of common concern, including promoting peace and stability in the Middle East through democracy, supporting international efforts towards a permanent settlement of the Arab-Israeli issue, fostering stability, democracy, and prosperity in a unified Iraq, supporting diplomatic efforts regarding Iran's nuclear program, and including the recent initiatives by 5+1 initiative. They talk about Afghanistan in that document, about Cyprus, enhancing energy security, strengthening NATO, countering terrorism. This prepared, of course, before the Arab Spring in 2006, but I think still valid as a framework when we look at the items they deal with. And looking at this lengthy list, we perceive that the majority of the United States and Turkish interests seem to be converging. But there are differences in perspectives concerning the realization of these interests. In other words, the aims are identical and still the same, I believe, but the means are sometimes not converging, or they disagree on how to approach a given challenge in their relations. Today, Turkey and the United States are sharing a challenging global agenda, from Syria to Iraq, as you mentioned, to Yemen, Libya, Iran, and Ukraine, from combating terrorism to energy security. They work together to find solutions to complex problems. And on all these issues, our cooperation will continue, and it will be crucial. Of course, I'm going to go into the details of Daesh or ISIL terrorism, but our commitment in our bilateral relations, there are also other phases. Our commitment for a solution in Cyprus continues. We support United Nations efforts in that sense. We would like to increase the breadth and depth of our economic, commercial, and investment relations. There is a great potential in this sphere. It is of utmost importance for Turkey is to be included in the ongoing transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and or that Turkey and the United States can sign a FTA in a tandem with this transatlantic partnership. Defense industry cooperation is also a fertile ground area for our relations and growth of our relations. When it comes to For example, if I pick one point of this agenda, Daesh, for example, and the situation in Iraq and Syria. Turkey shares approximately 1,300 kilometer borders with Syria and Iraq. And this means this is the only country bordering with Daesh. And Daesh constitutes a direct threat to Turkey's national security. And the situation on the ground remains highly fluid. As for Daesh, we maintain our views that the international coalition's air operations will not be enough. Bringing stability back to Syria and eliminate Daesh requires a comprehensive, swift, and action-oriented strategy. Daesh and the growing threat of sectarianism and extremism in the region can only be dealt with successfully once a non-sectarian, inclusive, and representative government based in Damascus and Baghdad. And Turkey has significant and solid contributions to the international coalition. For example, Turkey has designated ISIL as a terrorist organization since 2005, under its previous names, of course, and revised this list and names under its new name, revised in October 2013. Let's look at the foreign fighters transfer issue. We welcome United Nations Security Council resolutions 2170 and 2178. Certainly foreign fighters pose threat to everyone, and Turkey now aimed at preventing potential foreign fighters from entering Turkey and preventing those who already entered Turkey from traveling to Syria. In that sense, fostering border security measures, now more than 15,000 people have been included in no-entry lists since the Syrian crisis erupted, and more than 1,500 foreigners were deported from Turkey between 2011 and until this year in this context. When it comes to Iraq, Maliki years were lost years for Iraq and for the Middle East, and as a neighbor for Turkey. Now, with a new government, Ebadi government, we are doing well. The high-level visits going on in the last 6 months between in prime ministerial level and presidential levels. Both leaders visited each other and each country. Now, under a comprehensive and inclusive government in Baghdad, it's going well. On the other hand, Turkey is making significant contributions to equip and train the Kurdistan regional government and the Iraqi forces. More than 1,600 Kurdistan regional government troops have been trained by Turkey. We have provided medical treatment for hundreds of Peshmerga troops wounded in the clashes with Daesh. We have donated military equipment both to Iraqi forces and the Peshmerga. And we now have also started training Mosul National Guard forces. We have extended assistance to all Iraqis regardless of ethnic and sectarian affiliation. More than 200,000 Iraqis, including 20,000 Yazidis and Christians, were provided shelter in Turkey and delivering humanitarian assistance through Iraq. At least 750 trucks of humanitarian aid went to Iraq. When it comes to the Syrian conflict, now in its 5th year, it's a humanitarian disaster. At least 250,000 people were killed, lost their lives. 12 million people left their homes, uprooted. And in Turkey, there are at the moment approximately 2 million Syrians inside Turkey. And Turkey spent during this crisis $6.5 billion to the refugees. So we need a joint and coordinated effort in order to solve this crisis and solve the situation in Syria. The Geneva Declaration for us constitutes the roadmap for such a transition in Syria. So in order to deal with the situation, we still urge to provide safe zones for people, for more refugees, no-fly zones for the anti-Daesh forces in Syria, and a comprehensive and coordinated policy, not specific to Daesh in Iraq or Daesh in Syria, but a total strategy to deal with Daesh both in Syria and Iraq. Finally, in the years 2006, I remember when United States and Turkey signed that document I mentioned earlier, Turkey was calling for a comprehensive and inclusive security system for the Middle East, for all, including Iran and Israel at that time. Turkey was urging for peace, democracy, and economic integration in the region. And at that time, I remember, and I wrote about that, Turkey warned against sectarian divisions and conflicts in the Middle East, because for Turkish foreign policy makers, it was an opportunity of 100 years opportunity for the Middle Eastern states. But then the environment has changed. Arab Spring started. Middle East went into a turbulence. But still we need a comprehensive and active policy Middle East. And Turkey still promotes the same principle. So in the Arab Spring period and after the Arab Spring, in the coming decades, Turkish and American relations and cooperation and coordination will be valued and important and vital for all of us and for the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Jeffries.
Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you, SETA, for setting this thing up. Mr. Ambassador, colleagues, it's obviously, in every time I've ever spoken about Turkey since 1983, I can say the same thing, it's a critical and important time for the alliance. I agree with everything that our moderator said, and particularly the ambassador's plan, especially on Daesh in dealing with a comprehensive focus on ISIS and the Assad government, and frankly stability in Iraq, as one package, with Turkey and America doing this together, because those are the two key components. And it's a good illustration of how much we do need each other, and to the extent it works out well, how we do actually succeed. But nonetheless, this is an unusual period in the relationship, largely because of circumstances outside of outside of both the United States and Turkey, some inside both of our countries. And rather than go through the various areas where we're cooperating and need to cooperate more, because I agree with my two colleagues here, I'll just give you a little bit of the environment and some of the obstacles to that closer coordination we all want. First of all, we're facing two developments in the region that Turkey finds itself. Threats to the international order coming from the north, Russia, from the east, Iran, and from the south, an amorphous mix of the Assad government and the ramifications of that horrible civil war, the rise of ISIS, and militant extremist movements just generally that are to the south. All three of these movements, to one or another degree, are inimical to the nation-state system and international order as we understand it. The Russians, perhaps the most powerful, but the most limited. They only want to tweak the international system to advance the Russian agenda. The Iranians, somewhere in the middle, they're both, as Henry Kissinger said, a country and a cause, and they go back and forth. The country, that is President Rouhani, the cause, Qasem Soleimani. Pick your issue, pick your day, and one of the others on top. ISIS, it's functionally, it's a state with a lot of the attributes of a state, which is part of the problem, but it's ultimately a cause that has seized territory like a state, and it requires very urgent attention. And the Assad regime is an ex-state. So Turkey is surrounded, as it often is, as it was in 1983 when I first arrived there, with these various crises. And none of us are going to do well with all of these without cooperation between the United States and Turkey. But there are special problems with that cooperation. First of all, the rise of these threats is only one of the two changes in the environment that Turkey has to deal with and we have to deal with. The second one is the withdrawal / loss of American influence and ability to make things happen in the region. Now, pick your president to blame for this one. We're into a political process here, and some will say it was George Bush going into Iraq, and to some degree the way he did Afghanistan and the war on terror. Others will point to President Obama, the red line with Syria, the general allowing the Syrian situation to fester, not being attentive enough to the situation in Iraq, being too accommodating to Iran, and generally not willing to use military force in any kind of effective way. The two phenomena, the rise of these threats all around Turkey and the relative weakening or perception of weakening of American power, are in various ways beyond my ken related, but also somewhat separate. But the point is they form the reality that both we and Turkey have to operate. Okay. And we are operating, and I think some of the successes of the past weeks, be it dodging the bullet once again on the Armenian resolution, or the agreement to begin training some 5,000 people in Turkey, shows that the two sides can reach agreements. Nonetheless, there are two sets of problems, and these have been around for a long time. They're not the fault of either the Obama or Erdogan administration, but you have to take it into consideration, and the longer I deal with Turkey, or Turkish-American relations, the more I feel the need to emphasize these. Basically, we talk past each other and to some degree misunderstand each other. The United States sees Turkey as somehow this perfect country, this doughty ally that fought so well, which it did in Korea, that embraces our values in a way that we didn't expect many of our other allies, think of South Korea in fact, to embrace. And to boot is heart palpitations, a Muslim nation, so it shows we can be friends with Muslims. We can be friends with a country where the majority of the population is Muslim. And because of the sensitivities of the United States with Islam for a long time in the Middle East, that's important. So we expect Turkey to perform in ways different than the way it actually can perform as a nation state with its own interests. We think that these values represent not just Turkey having a shared interest in international trade, entrepreneurial activity, elections, but essentially the entire American agenda. This is one of the uncharms of the United States. When we beware, all of you, if you're not American, if we say you share our values, which means that we assume that rather than negotiate with you to get things done, we will come in with a list of things to present to you and tell you that if you want to be in our relationship with us, if you really share our values, if you're nice people, you will do what we ask you to do. This isn't theoretical. I delivered such lists all of the time. I tried to sugarcoat it from time to time, but and not just with Turkey. So the United States expects more from Turkey than it sometimes can produce. This is exacerbated by the fact that there are lobbies in the United States that are unhappy with Turkey for various historical reasons, and as they have much influence in Congress. The administration has to oversell the relationship with Turkey to say, hey, you've got to stand up to your own constituents, to your own lobbying groups, because this is so important. And this leads to then constant disappointment when Turkey acts like a normal country rather than like this dream that we have of what a model Islamic democratic NATO ally should be. On the Turkish side, and I'll conclude my remarks with that, there's an equal set of confusions, and it's not shared alone by Turkey. Many other countries share it to one or another degree, if not all of them. But with Turkey, it's particularly acute because it has an impact sometimes on our policy. Turkey doesn't understand that the United States is not, at bottom, a continuation of the British Empire. We're not all about Lausanne and spheres of influence and power politics and alliance systems and expanding our power. The United States really is a liberal order society. We seemingly violate that often when we have contradictory goals, and to some degree that's inevitable. Sometimes we do violate it for our own interests, but by and large the United States is trying to manage an international order. That's not as understood as it should be in Turkey, even though Turkey's been both a major contributor to and absolutely a major beneficiary of this order. And that has problems because it means that the Turks will assume things about us that are not so. One of the most important is that regardless of what happens, America has interests in an alliance with Turkey. It has interests in its bases in the Middle East. It has interests in working with the Saudis on oil policies, and et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, the United States, regardless of what Turkey does, or what Brazil does, or what India does, is not just going to go away or be ineffective. In other words, we become sort of a free good because the assumption is we're benefiting so much from this imperial role in the world that we don't really need allies to do very much. We just need them to kind of be allies and not get in the way. But in fact, we do need allies to help us a lot because, as we'll see in the elections coming up, Americans are conflicted over our role in the world. Americans can and will yank the U.S. out of the Middle East if things go badly. We're not in this thing for territories or coaling stations or whatever the hell people did in the 19th century. We're in it for values. If we don't think these values are shared, or we don't think we're having success developing allies in a region, we're going to start, or we will continue this slow withdrawal that we've seen over the past half dozen years. So on that cheery note, I'll pass it on to my colleagues to the left.
Thank you very much. My remarks follow on those of Ambassador Jeffries, not only because I'm sitting here, but because I think there's a relationship between them. U.S.-Turkish relations in recent years have come under considerable strain, and it becomes increasingly evident that Ankara and Washington seem to be, at times, drifting apart. They don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues. One could say Syria, Iraq, relations with Israel, Egypt, and one could go on. In the eyes of many Western critics, Turkey seems to be drifting away from the West in favor of closer ties with the Middle East. On the other hand, Turkish officials see the United States, as Ambassador Jeffries said, as having declining interest in the Middle East and has left a vacuum which Turkey has tried in some cases to fulfill, but has not been able to do it successfully. Now, there's truth in both of those images, but they are highly exaggerated and overly simplistic. But what is the case, I think, and this is the important thing, that we have entered a period where two major destabilizing actions are taking place simultaneously. One is the end of the Cold War and its impact on Russia, Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and American policy. And the second is the disintegration of the political order in the Middle East as we have known it since the end of World War I. And these two mega trends are interacting and producing a great deal of instability, both for Turkey but for the United States as well. Now, on the question of the Cold War, many, I think, of the current strains and tensions are a consequence in strains in U.S.-Turkish relations, are a consequence of the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. This removed the chief threat to Turkish security, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and at the same time it reduced Ankara's dependence on the United States. And finally, it opened up new opportunities in areas that had formerly been off limits to Turkish foreign policy. That's particularly meaning the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. And Turkey sought to exploit the new freedom of maneuver that it found it had to try to develop relationships with these countries and these regions. And it was not a case of Turkey abandoning the West or the Islamization of Turkish foreign policy, as some critics have charged, but a question of Turkey's increasing room for maneuver and a certain diversification and rebalancing of Turkish foreign policy. In effect, I would argue that Turkey acquired new interests and stakes in these regions, above all the Middle East, and it wanted to maintain these ties to these countries, which at times was seen as not congruent with U.S. interests. Turkey's intensification of its relationship with Iraq and Syria in the period prior to the Arab Spring provides a good example. The U.S. looked upon the intensification of the ties to Iraq and Syria with some consternation and irritation, and in fact tried to get Turkey to curtail some of its ties and the intensification of its ties, which it saw, which the U.S. saw as not being in U.S. interest. The main point is that Turkey had developed stakes in these regions, which they now found new national interests. The main thrust of Ankara's policy was motivated by the need to adapt, I would argue, to a new security landscape precipitated by the end of the Cold War and also by the disintegration of the old Middle East, the old order in the Middle East. Now, there are several issues, of course, where we could talk in detail about the differences between the United States and Turkey. Syria, obviously, is one of them and the most important, probably. But the differences over Syria have been a main cause of tension within relations with Turkey. And after 1998, relations with Iraq and with Syria had improved rather substantially over the period of the past decade. And initially, Erdogan sought to encourage Assad to diffuse the unrest that had begun to break out by introducing greater domestic reform. But when he saw that this advice, which he expected as a kind of, saw himself as a kind of mentor of Assad, when Assad did not follow this advice, then he switched his policy to a policy essentially of regime change, of fostering and trying to promote regime change in Syria, which brought him into increasing conflict with the Obama administration. Both Turkey and the United States, Obama and Erdogan, agreed that Assad had to go and that there could be no real peaceful stabilization in the Middle East as long as Assad was there. But there was no agreement about the timing and about how this departure of Assad was to be brought about. Turkey wanted the US to arm the Syrian rebels, pursue an active and determined policy of regime change in Syria. The United States was much more hesitant. Obama did not really want to not only have boots on the ground, he didn't really want to arm the Syrians, fearing, in some way probably justified, but that sophisticated weaponry might fall into the hands of our enemies, and therefore took a rather reserved position toward this. And I would say that Erdogan made 3 serious miscalculations that exacerbated the tensions with Washington. First, he underestimated Assad's resilience. He thought Assad would be ousted within a few months. 3 years later, he's still there, although this time it looks like his power is weakening. But he's not gone. Second, he overestimated Turkey's ability to shape developments in the Middle East. It soon became apparent that Turkey did not have the political and military clout to reshape the Middle East in its own image, and that US influence and political gravitas were still necessary to achieve a stable political order in the Middle East. And finally, he overestimated Obama's willingness to pursue a tough-minded, active policy towards Syria. He thought that Obama's caution and reluctance was really, Obama's reluctance to get deeply involved in Syria was due to Obama's desire not to make Iraq an issue in the upcoming presidential election. And that once the election was over, Obama then would pursue the more deeply involved, forceful policy that Erdogan expected. And he just underestimated the degree to which Obama did not want to get involved in a new Middle East conflict at a time when he was trying to withdraw from Iraq and from Afghanistan. Now, coming to the period right now, and the issue at hand being the question of ISIS in Syria, the differences between Turkey and the United States are fundamentally one of priority. The United States certainly thinks that getting rid of Assad is important, but it thinks it is more important at the moment to try to stop ISIS from obtaining a foothold in Iraq and in Syria. Turkey also doesn't want to see that happen, but its priority, is the same as it has been for the last 2 or 3 years. It sees its main interest in trying to overthrow the Assad regime. So that is the fundamental clash between the interests. It's a question of, in my view, of priorities. And Turkey began in a way by trying to force the United States to commit itself to more forces on the ground and to doing more to overthrow Assad, and the United States continued and continues to have and put its priority on dealing with ISIS first, and then coming to an agreement on what to do about Assad. Maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Larrabee. Dr. Kanat?
Thank you very much. After 3 speeches on U.S.-Turkey relations, kind of most of the issues were discussed. Because of that, I will try to approach the problem in a more general way. I think to understand the U.S.-Turkey relations, we have to first approach the problem in a more realistic manner. And realistic manner means there was never a golden age in U.S.-Turkey relations. There was good cooperation, strategic partnership, but there were some crises in the relationship, and international context helped basically to cover most of these crises. But starting from the end of the Cold War, what we see in bilateral relations is an overdue readjustment, reorganization, and restructuring of the partnership between 2 countries. I think since 1990, 2 countries are approaching the relationship in a way that they try to form a new partnership. They are very creative finding new names for it, right? For the last 20 years, the names that were used were strategic partnership, enduring partnership, model partnership. But somehow the content of the partnership was not attractive enough to fill that names, fill that very ambitious names actually. So there was constantly ad hoc partnerships, and this was one of the most significant challenge that 2 countries couldn't create some kind of adaptable, flexible partnership, strategic partnership that it can survive and it can be sustainable. One significant necessity was this: there was constantly emphasis that the relations are strategic, but strategic nature of the relationship also necessitate a working relationship, a kind of a functioning strategic partnership. And strategic partnership doesn't come up with a user guideline, or they are not automatic partnerships that, since geopolitically or strategically 2 countries match together, they can work together, or they can basically follow the same common threat perceptions and interests. The second difficulty or challenge was, especially starting from the year 2000, the relations started to have some problems because of multiple different challenges. One, change in the international system, a more fluid regional system after the invasion of Iraq, and domestic political changes and domestic economic changes in the United States. Because of that, this created a misperception of the intentions of 2 countries. The shift of access debate that was so popular in Washington, D.C. was part of this problem. So in 2003, when you go back and read the analysis of 2003, the crisis in 2003 after the March 1st voting in the parliament, you will see that a lot of analysts in Washington, D.C. started to write that there is a shift of access in Turkey, and shift of access was towards European Union. And they keep telling that, well, there is a shift of access because Turkey is taking a position in international relations, in regional politics, more in line with Brussels, Berlin, or Paris, right? And this shift of access debate constantly repeated itself. You know, when some people, when they define Turkish foreign policy during this time, When it was kind of, like the getting closer to Syria, it was Tehran-Damascus axis. So when it was getting some kind of investment from Saudi Arabia, it was pro-Saud. When it was getting, like the natural gas from Russia, it was pro-Russia or Eurasian foreign policy. When it was getting, like close relations with Balkans, it was neo-Ottoman. When it was getting better relations with Middle East, it was Islamist. And then, like now, when it is against the coup, it was pro-Ikhwan, or in Syria, it is pro-Sunni. So there's kind of constantly, because of the changes in Turkish foreign policy, regional structure, when you kind of have difficulty or when you ignore those different variables, you start to consider Turkish foreign policy in variables with identity mostly. And the third challenge was probably, it was stated in the morning by Ibrahim Kalin, Ambassador Kalin, that the relationship couldn't become a multi-dimensional relationship, especially the economic dimension of it, which could be a major stabilizer in relations, was somehow less developed than the other fields, especially the security fields. So for the last 15 years, when you look at the relationship, the only thing that stabilized the relationship was the close relations between the leaders, right? 2006 agreement that Ambassador Cetinsaya mentioned was signed when, at that time, Foreign Minister Abdullah Gül and Foreign Minister Condoleezza Rice, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice had really good relations. And when you look at the Obama period, especially in the first couple of years, the relations were stabilized, and many people consider as a honeymoon of the relationship when President Obama and Prime Minister Erdogan at that time had better relationship. But what happens is, in the absence of this relationship, when you do not institutionalize the relationship in a way that the partnership will be sustainable, effective, and partnership will somehow cover the misunderstanding, prevent misperceptions, it creates certain difficulties. Last year, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland said, Turkey and United States doesn't have strategic differences. Most of the differences between two countries are tactical divergences. But what happens is, if you do not fix the tactical divergence problem, it will not eliminate strategic partnership, but it makes the strategic partnership more difficult to sustain and stabilize. And I think this was a major problem. And in the last 2 years, when you look at the relationship, you will see that constantly there are three major developments, actually, especially on when you look at from the Turkey's perspective, that destabilized the relationship. One of them was, of course, the coup in Egypt. In the morning session, Etienne basically said that this had some kind of impact to Turkish society and Turkish policymakers. The coup in Egypt was not only a coup in Egypt. The coup in Egypt, when you look at the political memory of Turkish society, that meant some different things, right? This country had, in 1997 and 2007, it's a soft coup, it's kind of memorandum, it's a e-coup, whatever you call it. But the pattern was same. There was some demonstrations by anti-government groups, and at the end of the demonstrations, government stepped in and create a postmodern coup or e-coup. So when Turkey was looking at Egypt, at the beginning of the Arab Spring, the shared perception of being on the right side of the history was somehow damaged, right? At the beginning, U.S. basically avoided to use the C word to describe the military intervention in Egypt. And then it came to a point that Secretary Kerry stated that Egyptian military is basically restoring democracy in Egypt. And this meant for many people in Turkey, this meant U.S. going to its default setting in its politics about Middle East and supporting, basically endorsing authoritarianism instead of liberty for the sake of stability. The second major issue was the chemical weapons attack in Syria. And Syria has been, again, when you look at the US and Turkey's position in Syria, almost at the same time in 2011, in August, they took the same position and they come to a point after giving some time to Assad that, like the Assad must go. And there was this convergence, and Turkey basically, and many in Turkey and many in the region actually, assumed that this divergence will continue. But after a while, the positions started to diverge, and following the chemical weapons attack, Turkey, and not only Turkey, many countries around the world was expecting some kind of reaction from the United States. And this was, again, not only a Syria problem. This was a problem of strategic interest and strategic priorities. So Syria was considered as a strategic, basically, security threat for Turkey, right? Especially the chemical weapon use. And once again, the political memory come into the point, and Turkey remembered that, well, there was several different instances before, and Turkey had, for example, in 2004, 2005, when Turkey had some serious concerns about the PKK activity in Iraq. Turkey was pushing United States, asking United States to do certain things, but United States did things against Ansar al-Islam, one of the Kurdish groups with ties with Al-Qaeda, but said, well, we cannot do something about PKK because our strategic priority here is the stability of Iraq. So again, now in Syria, especially in May 2013, when Prime Minister Erdogan visited White House, and the debates and discussions about Syria, one more time, Turkey's strategic priorities, Turkey's security interest, that's from the Turkish side, was ignored by the United States. And this was a major challenge, right? So it wasn't only about Syria or the Assad regime, it was the fact that the feeling that constantly Turkish security interest and priorities were ignored by the United States. And of course, the third instance was the Kobani incident, and what happened after the Kobani, the statements that came from some senior administration officials that administration is frustrated by the inaction of Turkey, right? And for a country whose majority of the population was frustrated by the inaction of the United States in Syria, to hear that some senior administration officials leaking to Washington Post and New York Times that U.S. administration is actually frustrated the inaction of Turkey in the region, especially in Kobani, was kind of difficult to swallow. I have 1 minute left, so I will just wrap up. So what will happen in the future of relations? So it is not too late. Both countries are the allies of NATO, and strategic nature of the relations are still intact. But there are certain things. The three challenges that I counted needs to be somehow addressed. One is, of course, adding an economic dimension, which can be, again, an important stabilizer of the relationship, and empowering the social and cultural interaction between countries. The second thing is readjusting the relationship, and this adjustment needs to include diversification of relations. Diversification of relations not only in terms of categories of economy or politics, but of course to the region as well. And the third thing would be lowering the expectations, right? As Ambassador Jeffrey pointed out, these two countries, they can work together, they can create a partnership in the region, and they are very important for the stability of the region, but they have to somehow, especially the analyst also needs to understand that they need to avoid the false and kind of nostalgia of a golden age, right? Lower the expectation and try to create a sustainable partnership, right? And it needs to be a multi-layered partnership that it can survive independent of the leaders as well. And the third thing, of course, is understanding the domestic changes, regional transformations, right? Domestic changes doesn't mean that only the political situation in Turkey, but also the economic difficulties in the United States. And as a result, what can we expect can be instead of a strategic partnership, a la carte strategic partnership, that these two countries can decide where they can work together and avoid basically creating crisis in the areas that they are not agree, right? They can stay agree to disagree, And instead of categorical generalizations in the relation, they should look at the places, regions, or areas that they can work together. Thank you very much. And sorry.
No, that's fine, thank you. Instead of, I'm not going to ask each individual panelist questions, but I'd like to throw out some general ones. We all seem to agree on several things. One, Turkey is invaluable to the United States and vice versa, and that there's some differences. Ambassador Jeffrey rightly said that there's a lot of misunderstanding. I like to use the word mirror imaging. We're so good at mirror imaging, you know, and we often get things wrong and on both sides. Nonetheless, there are some misunderstandings that are real, that you can actually have different effects, and the word used was these tactical divergences, and how far can these tactical divergences, as Dr. Kanat said, lead to what I ask are there tipping points? For example, when Turkey, I guess among the military establishment, pursues potentially defense missile systems with China, you know, that may be a misunderstanding, but it certainly rivals Washington. Similarly, I don't think Turkey's off base to be worried when in 1990 they warned the United States, be careful about northern Iraq, be careful about the no safe havens. We told you what's going to happen. And you're starting to see the weakening of the Iraqi state continuously. So some of the actions the United States taking and Turkey taking, whether that be nation building, challenging the territorial integrity of states, and Turkey's perception, and from the Americans' perception, is Turkey drifting? Is this a reliable NATO ally? So my question to the panelists is, you know, how far can these differences go? Does the United States sit and well, Turkey will pursue a defense missile system with China, but we can still have Turkey's agreement on this issue? And similarly, how far does the United States go? We haven't addressed this, but I would really appreciate for the panelists to do so, our anti-ISIS campaign. We have a lot of contradictions here. We're trying, the coalition, and I speak for myself, not the US government, are seeking to build important coalition partners. Turkey is essential, and we're arming Kurdish groups, the PYD. You know, is that okay for Turkey? How far can that go? And again, is there a tipping point? That is to say, we've had bumps in this relationship, but do we just assume on both parts, well, this is just going to be, you know, a bumpy marriage for now, or do we have scenarios? Is Turkey necessarily, and the United States necessarily going to be these deep strategic partners? And finally, what can we do? We talked about this comprehensive security system. Can you comment on what would that look like? This comprehensive security system with two allies that don't necessarily have the same strategic interests on all issues. That's a lot to throw out with you, so I will, perhaps, Ambassador, you'd like to.
Well, regarding the last one, actually, we have a very deep crisis in the Middle East at the moment. Proxy wars, failed states, and the only solution is that everyone is going to sit onto the same table, every actor and every power in the Middle East, in one way or another. I don't know how, but and they made an agreement for peace and stability, and just give up the proxy wars. So they are going to have their satisfaction from the threats, and only the major actors in the region can do that. The only way is dialogue between states, and otherwise there is no end to this crisis.
Who leads this? Who leads this? You know, is the United States leading this dialogue at the table? Is it Turkey? We're leading from behind, Ambassador?
Certainly the biggest security question we have right now, and the thing that can most blow up the relationship, as you said, to get to a tipping point, is the security to the south, where the U.S. interest in stopping ISIS and pushing ISIS back and, quote, defeating ISIS has absolute priority for President Obama without seemingly realizing that it was the situation in Syria that gave rise to ISIS. From Turkey's standpoint, it's a very valid standpoint. Syria and the Assad regime is a greater danger. And I agree with that because aside from the awful things that the Assad regime does and its stalking house increasingly for Iran, the Assad clique is not going to forget Erdogan and what Turkey has done, and therefore in what they would see as tearing apart their peaceful country. And so therefore they're going to find ways to destabilize Turkey. So my feeling is, first of all, in terms of the real security interests here, Turkey's are more immediate. It is, by its nature, the closer country. It's, while a very strong country, it's the weaker country. And if I could take my pen out, I would sign for a, like many people inside the U.S. government, a no-fly zone tomorrow. Okay? Can I answer all the questions about the day after? No, but I don't care, because I can't answer all the questions of the day after if we don't do something like that. What I do know is we won't lose 1,500 American lives doing it, unlike some of our other adventures. So there's one that we seem to be moving towards this, but in a very complicated way that reflects badly on crisis management between the two countries, but frankly, it goes beyond that. I mean, this American administration has had a lot of problems around the world maintaining alliances and maintaining credibility. Turkey, on the other hand, has taken its zero defects policy and wound up in one or another degree of problem with all of its neighbors to the south: Israel, Syria, Iraq, on some days northern Iraq, although that's probably the best relationship, in Iran. There's not a very high level of professional skill being deployed in diplomacy. And on the other issues, the things to watch are obviously the Armenian genocide issue is really important to Turkey. But I think the Obama administration got it this year. I hope it gets it next year as well. The missile decision is really important to us, and it isn't that Turkey doesn't have a point about technology transfer, and it isn't that we don't have a point about, since the F-16 co-production, we've done a lot for Turkey's co-production and defense industry. It's the fact that you can't use these air defense missiles to defend anybody else in NATO, whereas Turkey's 3 of NATO's most important deployments to secure a fellow NATO country has been putting Patriot missiles, and in 1991 actually fighter planes, in Turkey because of situations on its borders. In fact, you've got Patriots from 3 countries there today. And why Turkey can't get this is beyond me. If Turkey wants to buy a few $1 billion worth of weapons from the Chinese and get some really cool technology transfer, I can understand that. Pick something other than the goddamn missiles, because this is a sensitive thing to us, because this is something that you might be called upon to stick them in Poland a year from now, given some of Putin's adventures in the airspace over the northern regions of NATO. And if Turkey has a missile system that won't go there, that's the kind of thing that, you know, goes beyond the usual tensions and fights in NATO halls and that kind of thing. So I worry about that. I worry about, obviously, the domestic lobbies here and the Armenian resolution, but I particularly worry about the security situation in the south.
Excellent, thank you. Can the other two, can you comment as well on some of these more sensitive issues? Dr. Kanat, you did mention them, and so did Dr. Larrabee, but, you know, do you see a tipping point? And again, how do we move forward? There are still some issues that are more sensitive than other. You did start mentioning them to each side.
I think one issue is there are multiple, of course, ways to understand this problem. One is to understand the U.S. role perception in the world. It is not only U.S. is not having problems with among its allies, U.S. is not only having problems with Turkey. In most of its allies, it has there's certain concerns about U.S. commitment, U.S. strategy, and predictability of U.S. actions. And this is not only Gulf, or this is not only Middle East that we are talking about. When you talk with Japanese experts and Japanese foreign policy makers, they are extremely concerned about what will be the U.S. action after, if something happens to Senkaku Islands, or if there is something in North Korea. And this is not only about Syria, this is not only about Iraq, it also has something to do with the crisis in Ukraine. A lot of people are reminding 1994 Budapest Memorandum and saying that if U.S. would be a credible and committed ally if their security is at risk. So this confusion, the confusion that many people in Washington, D.C. is having about the American decline, American role, post-American world, I think this is seriously influencing the U.S. allies and their actions. The second problem is, especially in regards to Middle East, is the regional fluidity. So each and every day, each and every year, there is a new variable that you need to take into account. Because of that, what United States and Turkey can best do at this point is another ad hoc alliance, another ad hoc partnership, and basically wait until the region stabilizes a little bit, then discuss about a more structured or institutional alliance. And of course, part of this would be ending the misperception on both sides. And this is not something that public diplomacy can do easily. This will be after what happened in the last 2 years, 3 years in the region. The actions of both states, actions of the United States, will influence the public opinion and U.S. perception in the world more than basically the the spending millions of dollars to public diplomacy at this point.
Yes, Steve. So our disengagement from the world stage, or let's say our leading from behind, is having secondary consequences or direct consequences on the perception of us and our alliance. Steve.
Well, it's more than that.
Yeah, please expand.
Basically, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and you look what happened in Syria when the question of arming the Syrian rebels came up, that the decisions in both cases, which seems to be not to get engaged too heavily and militarily, being afraid in one case in Ukraine that this will so-called provoke Putin to do something else, and in the Syrian case that somehow this would lead to weapons falling into the hands of our enemies. The general perception, I would agree, is that somehow Obama does not want to get engaged and is not willing to do that. And I would say that it will, as was mentioned here, Japan, China, Asia, Australia, they're all watching what the United States does or does not do. And if, as is happening, that the United States doesn't get engaged and isn't willing to stand up sometimes to a number of these challenges, they will take that into consideration and fashion their policies accordingly. And I think if you look at the situation in the South Sea situation with China, you can see that where the Chinese have begun to rethink their policy. Now, I think, and I thought at the time, the question of arming the Syrian rebels. Now, it's true that the rebels are disparate, not very well united, and so forth. But the real problem is that when we didn't engage, we created a political vacuum. That vacuum then was filled partially, or to a large extent, by forces associated with Al-Qaeda. And if the United States had gotten involved and had a clear policy of doing it, that would, the ability of al-Nusra and others would have been greatly, in my view, diminished. And yes, they would have still been involved, but there would have been a clear sense that the United States thinks this is an important issue, is putting itself out on the line on this, and that would have had a deterrent effect, not 100%, but it would have made, I think, a difference. But on the final thing about the comprehensive security order, that is a nice thing to talk about, but this is pie in the sky. I mean, you've got, as I said, two of the political orders that structured international politics in the world have collapsed. What do you think is going to happen? What do you expect to happen in the Middle East under these circumstances? Of course, there's going to be a lot of destabilizing actions and instability. I mean, Iraq is falling apart before our eyes. I mean, even just what has happened in the last couple of days. I don't know how to resolve this, but I would say the problem with what I'm going to say is that once it leaks out, then that would be terrible. But you've got to begin to think about restructuring of the Middle East and what we want there in terms of very concrete things, not just global security. Because as things are developing, it seems to me Syria is going to disintegrate into three parts: a small enclave for the Alawis, another part of it in which the DYP and the Syrian Kurds at least have influence on, and thirdly, then the rest of what remains of Syria and so forth. But that is going to be a terrible political vacuum in itself. So trying to restructure these entities or new entities is where I think a lot of the critical thinking should be going. And of course, you have to try to stabilize Iraq. But we have gone through a decade of trying to do this, and we continue to say that this fiction that Iraq is a stable state. It's not. And now it is true that I think that we have to acknowledge that the Turks were right when they said, if you go into Iraq, you're likely to, it's likely to collapse. It will then result in giving Kurdish nationalism a very big boost, and you will have more instability, and you will not and the center will not hold under those circumstances. But we did it, and now we're paying the consequences for it. So I mean, all these, but the basic point is, as I was trying to say, is that these are enormous political cataclysms that are happening. It's not some minor thing. The whole order in the Middle East is falling apart, and it is up to the United States in some way and its allies to find a new structure. But that obviously will be very, very challenging.
Thank you. I'm going to take a few questions. Can you go, Mark, if you want to go to the microphone, though? We have about 15 minutes. And we'll take, I'll start with Mark here, and then we'll go to this side. Thanks, Mark.
Dr. Mark Meyer with SUNY Maritime College,
Sure.
Denise, and everyone else, a wonderful presentation. But isn't there, listening to Dr. Kanat's proposal for an a la carte partnership, a modified strategic partnership, I mean, aren't you missing something, the implications of that? So let's assume that we do that, and we implement Dr. Kanat's proposal. Here are the implications, because Ambassador Jeffrey actually indicated what those are. What are the big issues? And Ambassador Cetinsaya also said Turkey wants a free trade agreement from the United States. Ambassador Jeffrey said, we're worried about the Armenian genocide issue. That's for sure. Turkey's worried about that issue. And on the missiles, you know, there is a defense industry in this country, and it's very, very powerful. And there's one place, it's across the city here, it's called the Congress. You've talked a lot about Obama and the executive branch and all these things. The implication is, and I totally agree with you, Dr. Kanat, Turkey should create its own foreign policy. It's modified partnership. It's a la carte partnership. Implication, big implications in the United States Congress, because right now, and we'll talk the truth, the perception of Turkey in the Congress is, I say maalesef, is not very good. Why is that? That's because the congressmen see what goes on. They see the CPMIEC, the Chinese missile thing, and they see all these things. So my point is, implications for separation of powers, our government is multifaceted. So you can deal with the executive, but when Turkey comes and wants a free trade agreement to the US Congress, the implications, Dr. Kanat, of your proposal, I think they will see that there's a difficulty there, and perception in the American Congress could create bigger problems for Turkey. So I think we should think a little bit carefully about fixing that situation rather than making it a la carte. Anyway, that's my idea.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, well, I'm going to take a few, but please ask brief questions, and then we'll have our speakers address them all.
Thank you. I am Ali Aslan, Washington correspondent of Zaman newspaper. Thank you for the opportunity. Actually, I'm going to ask another how far question, similar to yours. The question is about Turkish democracy. How far can Turkey-US relations tolerate the ongoing de-democratization process in Turkey? Are there any red lines associated on the part of US government? Because we're seeing tremendously negative actions in Turkey, which includes journalists being imprisoned, and newspapers under the threat of shutdown by the prosecutors, many things. And is there really a red line? How far can this go from the US perspective?
Thank you. Alan?
Thanks. Alan Murkowski, Center for American Progress. Ambassador Cetinsaya, I'd like to ask you a question I asked last panel, but I should have saved it for you, actually. The Train and Equip program, now currently underway. It took the US and Turkey some time to negotiate the details. In your mind, are these fighters being trained to fight ISIL or to fight Syrian regime forces?
Thank you. That's a good question.
I'm Mark Baskar. I'm with the Center for American Progress. This question is for Mr. Larrabee, but anyone can answer it. Given that the Middle East has so many failed states and the steady proliferation of armed non-state actors, do you think that Turkey and the US could, and perhaps the Saudis, could work together to restructure and perhaps partition Iraq and Syria to reflect the reality on the ground, and would that lead to greater regional stability?
Oh, goodness. 4 easy questions. I'm going to ask our panelists to address as you can. Which ones yes, go ahead, Steve.
Let me go to the last one. I think they should try. I think the perception of their neighbors, Turkey's neighbors, is going to be very important. And there, I'm not at all sure that many of the neighbors trust Turkey that much. But on the other hand, you have seen in recent weeks a shift in Turkey's position towards more cooperation with Saudi Arabia. That's a big change because they were on very different sides of many issues, particularly Egypt, where the Saudis fully backed the Egyptian army, and of course Turkey was on the opposite side. So I think that it's one of these situations, yes, we should do it, but it will be very difficult to get all of them on this same wavelength. The question of red lines and internally, we didn't talk much about, in fact, so far as I can remember, in the last session and this session, not at all, about the internal situation, because I think that is something that is preoccupying Washington policymakers, because the trends internally are very negative. The increasing authoritarian tendencies that Erdogan has displayed over the last 2 or 3 years, the crackdown on the media, a number of other things that really call into question basic parts of whether Turkey can be considered a fully democratic country or not. And the future is not, in my view, if you're looking at it now, not very bright. If Erdogan succeeds, and I personally don't think he will, but if he succeeds in getting enough support for changes in the Constitution that strengthen much more than to date the role of the presidency, I think this would be a really tragic step, which will have very negative consequences for Turkish democracy. And it's quite clear that there are people within Erdogan's own party, including Abdullah Gül, the former president, who have very serious reservations about the direction in which Turkey is moving. And I'm sure that whatever he may say publicly, Prime Minister Davutoglu has some great concerns himself, because Erdogan is basically asking him to step down from being carrying out his role as prime minister. That would be basically a position which no longer has very much power to influence anything. Who would want that job? So I think watching what is going to happen with Erdogan's attempt is going to say a lot about how Turkey is going to evolve politically in the next decade. And the prospects for that are not very good. And listen, just one more thing on the Kurdish issue.
Sorry to interrupt, we're out of time.
Okay.
Really time constraints. I'm going to ask you to wrap up, and each of the panelists to make some final concluding remarks.
The Kurdish issue is very important here, and unless that can be settled again, if that continues to go on, it will inhibit Turkey's political evolution in a very negative way.
Oh, to the question that was.
Succinct points.
Yeah, just one point. Actually, I'm not clear about the question, but what I mean, a la carte partnership is not something that it will not be strategic. It can be strategic, but the parties can pick and choose the areas that they can cooperate. And United States has domestic considerations. The United States has separation of powers, but in Turkey as well, there is a very strong public opinion, very attentive public opinion, politicized public opinion that can be very influential in the decision-making of the foreign policymakers as well. So this situation is not something particular to the United States. Each and every country, I think, has its own domestic considerations or the stakeholders.
Thank you. Ambassador.
I kind of like a la carte relationships because that's basically what we have, not just with Turkey, with most countries. Only once in a while do we, America or other countries, have to make strategic decisions. One is extending the European trade negotiations to Turkey. That's a strategic decision of great impact. Another one from Turkey's standpoint, and I forgot to mention that in my list of what could go really badly wrong, would be Turkey truly embracing Putin's effort to circumvent Ukraine and develop a Turkish-Russian energy corridor into Europe as Europe's energy future. That is a real strategic move. That's a game changer. Not a good one, but if you want to find the definition of what a strategic move is, that's it. To the human rights question, I'm a little cynical on this. First of all, we're facing so many crises in the world. You know, tinkering inside countries' democracies is not where the Obama administration is. President Obama was very clear in his listing of what's important and what isn't important to him, or what he's going to fight for in the Middle East. In the UN General Assembly in 2013. He keeps on repeating it, so I think he's internalized it and he means it. Fighting terror, stopping weapons of mass destruction, supporting our friends and allies, and that includes Turkey, and ensuring the flow of gas and oil. He then specifically said, look, I'm a great fan of democracy, but you notice it wasn't one of them. So here's where the red line is on that, but it is an important one, and that is arresting more journalists and more of what we see is foolishness and mistakes on the part of particularly President Erdogan and some of his statements, particularly ones that hurt us personally. They don't go down well in Washington, particularly the Congress. That gets to the point here. But basically, the relationship is so important, you can shrug it off. What we cannot shrug off is anybody who messes with the democratic right of Turks to decide by free vote who governs their country. That is a huge change. That would be a strategic change on the part of whoever's running the Turkish government, and it would lead to, I suspect, a strategic change by the United States and the EU.
Thank you very, very much. Ambassador.
We cannot change the course of history as individual countries. We cannot change the others' internal socio-economic dynamics. We should live through it. And actually, Turkey at the moment is in a process of great transformation in order to integrate the dynamics of the global system. This is a genuine, the original transformation and normalization of history and politics in terms of Turkish political and social life. So it's, of course, lots of tensions, lots of spasms, and the situation in the neighbors doesn't help its negative effects, but trying to do its new constitution, Turkey, trying to place himself, herself in the global order, trying to solve the Kurdish issue, the consolidate its social forces, and of course there are conflicting interests, conflicting social groups, religious groups, whatever it is. So, but I believe Turkey will overcome all these challenges and walk through its way in the 21st century. When it comes to train and equip program, it's a dilemma actually. Turkey insists in its views that the real cause is the Assad regime, and the Malikis and Assad's policies created ISIL. But so we are equip and train the National Syrian Coalition's forces, Free Syrian Army forces. Of course, as an imminent threat, they are going to fight with Daesh on the one hand, but they are doing the major work with Assad. But Turkey is trying to say that unless create a safe haven, unless create no-fly zone, it is not going to work, because Assad is supporting Daesh. So it's a dilemma. So certainly, and the train and equip program will go nowhere under the circumstances, and it is going to be a pity. So short run, we certainly get together and eliminate Daesh, because it is not the part of the Middle East. I mean, the Iraqi people there, Syrian people there, sects there, the sectarian groups there, yes, they are natural, sociological elements of the Middle East. The countries are there, but Daesh is an amorph entity. So, and destabilizing entry, security threat. So in the short run, we should get together and get rid of Daesh, and then try to create stability in the Middle East. And I believe this is only can be true. I know you are going to smile, but it is going to be a Westphalian solution. I don't see any other solution. I mean, everyone, especially Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt get together and try to find a stable solution to the problems of the Middle East.
Thank you very, very much. We're running a little short on time, so I want to again thank the panelists for this excellent presentation. And he wants 2 minutes. Yes, and Gather wants 2 minutes.
I'm not going to make extended comments. I just want to thank all of you for being here today, to our distinguished guests who spoke earlier today. Thank you very much for this, and we will continue brainstorming about US and Turkey. Thank you.